Hello and welcome to All That Jazz. I'm Viviám María López. It is always said that drummers walk to the beat of their own drums. My guest is no exception. He's a New York-based jazz drummer who has performed and recorded with an array of musicians, including Benny Golson, David Liebman, Eric Alexander, Mike Lydon, Peter Bernstein, and Slide Hampton, just to name a few. My guest today is jazz drummer, composer, and educator, Jason Tiemann. Welcome, Jason.
Thank you very much for having me.
It's a pleasure to have you here in All That Jazz. Well, although you are based in New York, you are actually born in Tampa, Florida.
Yes, I was. I was born in Tampa, Florida, the year of 1973, to a family of musicians, and I still do have some family there, but we then moved to Kentucky in the early 80s. And I lived in a series of different places. I started in Louisville, Kentucky, and then I ended up in Owensboro, Western Kentucky. Then I studied music at the University of Kentucky in Lexington. After which, moved back to Louisville, where my wife's family was from, and we stayed there for many years and raised our family.
Oh, great. Now, when you were around the age of 12 or so, your father went to a garage sale and he bought something that changed your life. What was that?
Yes, there were two items, actually. There was two records, LPs. One was Art Blakey and the Jazz Messengers, and it was the Messengers on one side and Afro-Cuban Percussion Ensemble on the other side.
Yes.
That had a profound impact on me, as well as a three LP set called The Drums, which was issued by the Impulse record label, and it was a chronology of all of the great jazz drummers, starting with Warren Baby Dodds all the way up through modern giants like Paul Motian. So I was exposed to Philly Joe Jones, Elvin Jones, Joe Jones, all the greats that had recorded, you know, throughout the history of the music. And it, I think maybe it was a little bit of not understanding the music so much that kept me going back to try to listen. I was introduced to Louis Bellson, who I ended up meeting many years later. Absolutely. But yeah, that was that had a profound impact on me as a budding musician.
And in reference, for example, to Art Blakey, he was quite an inspiration for you as well?
Oh, of course. I mean, the first time I heard him playing was on the LP that I told you about, and he was doing things that were really unique, like bending the pitch of the snare drum with his elbow, and something about the colors with which he would play the music and how he would structure sections of the songs that he was playing. It kind of hit home to me at a very early age.
And in many ways, he made you fall in love with jazz?
Yeah, I think so. There's something about the infectious beat that he had, the rhythm, the propulsion and the drive that he had that really caught my ear early on. Now,
who would you say has influenced you the most in your playing?
That's a really tough question. I mean, the obvious answer would be drummers, but I think with respect to the music, though, you know, all of the great band leaders, Miles Davis, John Coltrane, Bill Evans, Charles Mingus, Ahmad Jamal, all the great band leaders influenced me because of the way that they could structure their music in such a way that there was a kind of an architecture to it, meaning like not just like going on a session and playing a couple of choruses or whatever. It was there was always a shape. Yeah.
Now, you began your career, we would say, in the Midwest. You were playing jazz clubs, and you were quite active over there. Can you tell us a little bit about those gigs in the Midwest?
Yeah, I was in Louisville, Kentucky, and there was Indianapolis was only 2 hours away. Cincinnati was 2 hours the other direction. You could go 2.5 hours south, and there's Nashville. So there was enough work between all of those cities that made it really possible. While I was in Louisville, I taught at the University of Louisville with the Jazz Studies program for many years before moving to New York. But yeah, so there were one of the benefits of me being at the stage of my career when I was in Louisville is that when musicians would say come in town from New York or wherever, a lot of the times I would get called to play with them because I was a good reader, and I knew a lot about the music, and the word of mouth kind of got around that, you know, when you're in Louisville, call this guy, you know, or you're Indianapolis, same thing. Yeah.
Now, do you find main differences between, you know, say, for example, Kentucky and Indiana, and now that you've been living in New York, in the playing or just the nightlife overall?
Yeah, there are so many highly skilled musicians in New York City area. And not to say that there aren't, there are quite a few in the Midwest as well. But I think that the chances of going to a gig in New York, and you know that you're going to be playing at a very high level. So I think that's one of the things that I've noticed the most, is that the intensity with which the music is played, it's almost like a reflection of just the grind of living in New York City. There's a give and take. For example, if you get on the subway, you know, the subway takes off and everybody kind of shifts and like, I don't know if that makes any sense or not, but and the same thing with when you're even just walking down the street, there's always this give and take, and I think that you kind of take that to the bandstand, and there's a flexibility, but there's also what I've noticed with all the musicians that I play with is the ability to kind of stand your ground, musically speaking, and be a leaning pole for everybody. So that was probably the biggest thing that I learned out of living in New York City, was that you have to play your thing, whatever instrument you play, so strongly that everybody can be comfortable to lean on you.
I like that. I like that. So we're taking our first break, and when we come back, Jason will tell us why he moved to New York and who also helped him make that big decision. The answer when we come back. Stay tuned.
Miami-Dade College has career paths in anything you want to be. What's your story? Be global. Be cutting edge. Be inventive. Be investigative. Be a hero. What do you want to be? Be the best. Be you. Be MDC.
Welcome back to All That Jazz. Today I'm joined by jazz drummer and educator Jason Tiemann. Jason, you wanted to move to New York. Before you tell us why, who helped you make the decision?
Well, there are a couple of people actually. First of which was my wife. And I can go into that in a little bit more detail later, but I also should mention that there are a number of New York City musicians who I met through my educational career. I've been teaching the Jamie Aebersold jazz the jazz workshops for I think close to 20 years now. And there are a lot of New York City musicians such as Eric Alexander, David Hazeltine, Jim Snydero, who all were encouraging me to move to New York for many, many years. But at the time that they were encouraging me to move to New York, my wife and I had a young family, and the thought of moving our family into a very expensive place to live was a little bit scary for me. So eventually my wife did keep pushing me, and finally she managed to get a job in the city. She's a school administrator, and that helped us get at least a launching pad for our family to move.
That's very good. And now, as you said, you move your wife and your kids. Do they love being there?
It's a great place to be as a teenager. You know, my boys are very into the New York City life and the style of living.
Yeah,
and,
three boys,
Yeah,
right?
3 boys. They're all teenagers, 19, 17, 15 right now. Yeah, our family has really adjusted quite well to I mean, New York City is not a place for anybody to live, I don't think. I think you have to really love the culture and that style of living. For example, like parking, there's no place to park. Rent is super expensive. You know, there's other challenges, especially with being a drummer, like getting up and down the stairs with a set of drums for the subway, which, you know, I do have a car, but it's challenging. But there's something about the energy of the city that keeps you into it. But yeah, the boys love it. Yeah.
Oh, it's a great experience, I'm sure. Now, in addition to New York, you were quite busy last year, for example, traveling all over. You came back down to Florida, Louisiana, Kansas. I mean, tell me about all those the great traveling that you do.
All over the place. Yeah, I've been traveling quite a bit with a piano player by the name of Larry Fuller, who is a really, really great musician. If you've not heard of him, I would check him out. But he spent many years playing with the great Ray Brown, and so he's taken what he learned from Ray Brown. Anyways, so we've been traveling all over the place, back and forth from California and here and there, and there's a mix of that and working with other musicians, of course. A lot of educational things, like I was in the University of South Florida a couple of months ago, and before that I had done another thing at Loyola down in New Orleans. Yeah, so a lot of that kind of stuff.
Festivals, a little bit of everything, well-rounded. And now you're teaching at the Jackie McLean Institute of Jazz at the University of Hartford. Jazz Studies faculty.
Yeah, this is my third year on the faculty with the Jackie McLean Institute. And I'm very excited to be there amongst many, many really great musicians.
Now, your commute from New York to Hartford must be, how long is it?
Well, without traffic, it could take as little as 2 hours and change, maybe 2 hours and 15 minutes. But usually, by the time I leave my house, I have a full day of teaching. I just go up one day a week, and by the time I get to Hartford, I'm getting into their morning rush hour. And then by the time I finish, I'm getting into New York City rush hour. So it could take 3 hours. That's a general bet that it's going to take about 3 hours. Yeah.
So you make yourself busy in your commute, listening to music? I mean, what do you do?
Sometimes I just turn all the music off and just be at one with the silence, you know, and just reflect on my thoughts and that sort of thing. Sometimes I listen to music. Sometimes I transcribe while I'm driving. You know, I'll start a track and I'll just keep backing it up and trying to sing along with it, and then I'll turn the recorder off and try. If I can't sing exactly what I just heard, then I have to listen to it again and just keep doing that and rehearsing a sound in my head.
Good, and it's good that you drive because that way, like you said, you have that time to yourself and to planning your things now. Do you enjoy, also going back to university, enjoy teaching?
Yeah, I do enjoy teaching. It's always, it's a privilege to have information that I can share with other musicians that are interested in learning. It's something that I don't take lightly. You know, there's a big reward in showing somebody something, and it's like a garden. You watch things grow and change and evolve, and hopefully in a positive way.
Inspiration, you can change other people's lives. And in fact, since we're an educational institution, just like University of Hartford, and many students that came to see you today perform an amazing performance, by the way. Any message or advice you could give to them? Yeah,
you know, I mean, this is stuff that I've learned from other musicians, great band leaders, and that is, when you're on the bandstand, you have to look at this area as being sacred, and to not bring any excess baggage onto the bandstand, and also something that I learned from the great Benny Golson. You know, if something happens that you're not expecting on the bandstand, don't show it. Don't show it on your face. You have to find a way to validate and just be flexible, like I was talking about earlier with just living in New York City. You have to be flexible enough to kind of fit into the grooves, so to speak, in a way that makes everybody sound great. You know, and also the other big thing that I stress with not only my drum students, but all the jazz students that I work with, either at the University of Hartford or the Jamie Aebersold program, is that your job as a musician is to make me sound great, and my job is to make you sound great. And if we can all do that at the same time, the chances of the music growing and blossoming are always better.
Without a doubt, without a doubt. And in fact, after we finish the interview, then you also have a workshop or clinic with students of Miami-Dade College, which is really great too.
Yeah, looking forward to that. And again, working with a new set of students is always exciting. It's not unlike being on the bandstand and improvising, because you don't have any idea what level that they might be at or what kind of problems might come up, you know, that you will address. So that's kind of a beautiful aspect of this being an educator, is that, you know, hopefully I have enough to say that, you know, I can hear something and relate or relay the information in a way that they'll understand that's pertinent to where they are at that stage of their development.
Without a doubt. And friends, it's time for us to take our next break. And when we come back, we continue our conversation with our very special guest, Jason Tiemann, right after this.
Miami-Dade College has career paths in anything you want to be. What's your story? Be global. Be cutting edge. Be inventive. Be investigative. Be a hero. What do you want to be? Be the best. Be you. Be MDC.
Thank you for joining us again in All That Jazz. Still with me on the set is my guest, jazz drummer, composer, and educator, Jason Tiemann. Jason, welcome back.
Thank you.
Now, besides playing with the luminaries that we mentioned at the beginning of the show, what other players can you share that you've played with?
In New York, there are quite a few. A couple of people that put me to work immediately when I got to New York would be Eric Alexander, which I think I mentioned earlier, David Hazeltine, a great pianist, yes. Peter Bernstein. Those guys hooked me up with a great pianist and organist by the name of Mike Ledon,
yes.
who was really, really helpful when I got to New York in terms of just kind of almost being a mentor, so to speak. Like I would play gigs with him, and then I would get the email, and it was always in such a positive way that you know, he was really, really good about pointing out things that he wouldn't call them flaws. He would say things to think about when you're playing, or you know, and that's a lot of playing with all of those guys for that matter. Helped me really get ready for the pace and the level of playing on the New York scene. So those are a couple of guys. There are some other musicians. The great Harold Mabern, who is no longer with us. He recently passed. When I first got to New York, one of the first gigs that I played, he was on, and was very, very encouraging and helpful, you know, in terms of just making me feel like I was in the right place. So many musicians that I can't even call upon right this moment, but those are a few that come to mind.
Definitely. Now, I know that in addition to playing jazz, you also have been performing in various other. What other genres do you also play? You
know, I mean, being a jazz student for life, which is what I consider myself, you really kind of have to learn a lot about different types of world music, whether it be Afro-Cuban music and the difference between that and Brazilian music. There's a lot of subtleties to their rhythms and how the music is supposed to be approached in both cultures. And I think a lot of those, or I don't think, I know, a lot of those cultures have become synonymous with what we do on the bandstand. You really kind of have to have a broad sense of world music in order to make sense out of the music that we're playing. So. Indeed.
Now, do you prefer to play big set or small set?
Well, you know, I play a very small kit by modern drum standards. It's a four-piece kit. There's a bass drum, snare drum, a high tom, and a floor tom. That's the kind of the bebop set of drums with a small bass drum, which is 18. And I typically just use two cymbals, ride cymbal on both sides and a pair of hi-hats. Funny story about the small bass drum. Okay. The reason that drummers started playing the small bass drum was because it was easy to fit in the trunk. So when John Coltrane would go out on tour, Elvin Jones they would travel in a car, if you can imagine that, in a lot of cases, and they needed something that would fit in the trunk, because otherwise it was strapped on the roof, and if it rained, they were calfskin heads and they would be ruined by the time they got to the gig. So.
Thanks for sharing that. Now, when playing with other jazz musicians, what would you say is the importance of the drummer?
Well, the obvious thing would be to keep a steady beat. but I think ultimately everybody is responsible for ensuring a good, solid rhythmic foundation. My job is, as I said earlier, is to make everybody sound as good as possible. I mean, I try to become invisible in the mix, and I try to consider all the musicians that I'm playing with. What can I do to make these guys sound better than they already sound? Like, for example, the concert that we just played here, everybody plays at such a high level. Sometimes the best thing to do is kind of to sit just underneath where they are and find a way to balance that out. Yeah.
Yes, yeah. Now, what do you think of the laid-back feeling in the while playing bebop?
That's a hard question to answer, because I think when we talk about laying back in the music, we're talking about dividing seconds into thousandths, so to speak. I think that the overall sound of the group and the time feel can have a settled and laid-back feeling, but still be on top of the beat. So when people ask me if I try to consider myself laid-back drummer, I don't think in those terms. Again, I'm trying to make everybody sound as good as possible and trying to find where their beat placement is. For example, some bass players play more on top of the beat. And if I play, my job is to identify where they are and to adjust myself accordingly to where they are. So if he's on the top of the beat, I want to put myself behind the beat just a little bit, because if we're both on top of the beat together, what do you think is going to happen? The music's going to rush. If he's on the back side of the beat and I play on the back side of the beat, it slows down. So you have to figure out, that's my job, is to figure out where they are. So laid back feeling, it's hard, it's a really difficult one to answer.
Now, in the last decade, how has the role of the drummer evolved as today, and what do you see in the future?
You know, from my perspective, the role of the drummer is pretty much the same as it always has been, and that is to be content with being a rhythmic foundation and not to necessarily show off all the time. The direction of the music is kind of an interesting thing, and I think it's subject to debate. There's a lot of people out there doing what they call stretching and on the tradition and trying to do something that's new and modern and fresh and hip. But at the end of the day, I think that just swinging is where it's at. So, I mean, but I'm a hard person to ask that question to, because I'm kind of an old soul when it comes to the music. I mean, I'm a lifelong student of the music, and I'm still trying to sound like the guys that I listen to.
Me too. Well, talking about those guys that you're listening to, Art Blakey once said, "I do things my way, what I want to accomplish, what I'm after, and what's running through my mind." You're supposed to be playing in such a way, in such a spiritual way, that you take the whole audience and put them right inside your drum.
Absolutely. Well, you know, I played with a number of people that went through the Messengers, the Art Blakey Jazz Messengers. One of which is my boss at the University of Hartford, the Hart School of Music. His name is Javon Jackson. He was one of the Jazz Messengers, and my dear close friend Steve Davis, who plays trombone, also was one of the Jazz Messengers. And Steve told me a story about Art Blakey, kind of that relates to that quote. And he said that the music is a gift from above, and it's we receive it, and it comes into our heart, and it goes directly to the audience in a blink of an eye. So we receive the message, and it's out. So it's a very spiritual thing, and that's also where I learned the idea of the bandstand being sacred, because Art Blakey was kind of known for that, from what I understand, was that the bandstand is a sacred territory. You don't bring excess baggage onto the bandstand. You're here to create the music, and you're receiving from the Creator
and giving.
And transmitting in the blink of an eye, like I said.
We got that right. Now, about talking about giving, we're super excited about your new recording that's coming out in February, Tiemann. We have it right here. Congratulations, first off, on that, which features some of your original work, and also you're joined by great musicians. Tell me a little bit more about that.
Yeah, it was. We recorded it back in the spring of this past year, 2019. Have the great Ed Cherry plays guitar, and Kyle Kohler, Hammond organ. It's a kind of an established band. We've been playing a lot together over the past couple years. Sometimes Ed will book the group as his trio. Sometimes Kyle books it as his, and sometimes I do as well. But I had originally was writing the music, and I was considering not using an organ. I was going to use a more traditional acoustic bass piano combination. But for some reason, the music just kept telling me, I think this is an organ and guitar recording. So yeah, and then I wrote, I think there are 5 original compositions, as well as a few others. There's a standard, I Didn't Know What Time It Was, Rodgers and Hart classic, J.J. Johnson's Lament. But yeah, I'm very, very excited about that. And it's starting to get a little bit of a buzz with the radio play, so I'm excited about that as well.
Very, very good. Well, congratulations on that. We wish you all the very, very best.
Thank you.
And thank you again for being part of All That Jazz.
My pleasure.
All the very best. And friends, this is all that we have for today. Until next time, when we bring you all that is jazz, I'm Viviám María López. Have a great jazzy day.